Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we'll be continuing our series of Halloween-themed episodes. This time around, we'll be looking at 1998's The Faculty, an alien invasion movie. But first, we're going to look at a different alien invasion movie that's a totally different tone and style. And that is Little Shop of Horrors. In particular, the director's cut is what we watched. So for those who are unfamiliar, meek flower shop assistant Seymour, played by Rick Moranis, pines for coworker Audrey, played by Ellen Greene. During a total eclipse, he discovers an unusual plant he names Audrey 2, which feeds only on human flesh and blood. The growing plant attracts a great deal of business for the previously struggling store. After Seymour feeds Audrey's boyfriend, Orrin, Steve Martin, to the plant after Orrin's accidental death, he must come up with more bodies for the increasingly bloodthirsty plant. And this is a remake of a Roger Corman horror film from the 1960s that was then turned into a Broadway musical, and then they made this movie based off of it.
Oh, okay.
Which happens a lot. Like The Producers is an instance of that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There's like more recent stuff. I feel like we've
Mean Girls,
yeah,
Heathers,
yeah.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah, so it's a pretty common thing. So Ariana, I know you had seen this movie back when you were a kid, right?
Yes.
So did I. I think a lot of millennial children saw this movie when they were young. And this is the first time I saw the director's cut, which is pretty much the same except for the third act. That's where it's different. What did you think of Little Shop of Horrors first in just general?
I enjoyed the film. I think the director's cut drags on a little too long for me towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I rather watch the theatrical one for whatever reason. I think it's a mix of just being like, there's a part that just feels odd that once Audrey 2 just becomes a little bit more of the main focus, it feels a little bit muddled. And you almost wish that they had threaded that a little bit more tighter together.
What are you just talking about, like the last 10 minutes of the movie?
The last 15 minutes of the movie, I feel it really drags on.
I would disagree with you.
Ooh, first time.
To quote Dan Aykroyd, "Jane, you ignorant slut." I like the down ending of the director's cut, and that is the ending of the actual Broadway musical. I do think the Audrey plants attacking the planet sequence does go on. Like, I think we get it at a point by the 12th, like Audrey head busting through a brick wall.
Yeah.
I do think, that is redundant. I wish they had cropped that attack of the planet down just a little more, because I think the downbeat ending of the original musical is a better ending compared to the theatrical cut, which kind of ignores the fact that Seymour did kill at least one person. We could say for sure he was responsible for one person's murder. And that's just kind of ignored for the sake of giving the audience a happy, feel-good ending.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand also just having a preference because it's down and out. But I think it's kind of musically, it's weird for me because so all the songs hit until we get to Audrey 2 singing and then making at the current moment remarks about pop culture.
What do you mean? Do you mean the final song, Mean Green Mother from Outer Space?
Yes.
That's in the original cut
I know
too.
it's in the original cut, but I'm talking about having rewatched it and just feeling like it's sort of out of place compared to the other songs that don't really have a lot of references to the time that it was made. Because it's sort of when you're watching the film, it does a good thing of almost being floating through time. You don't know if it's the 60s or 50s or the 80s.
No, I disagree. It feels very much the early 60s to me. because of it's the music style is like this doo-wop style.
Yeah, it is, but then it gets confusing when Audrey 2 starts mentioning a little bit.
Oh, does Audrey the lyrics of that song mention the 1980s?
Yes.
What do you remember?
I don't remember specifically. We would have to look it up.
Well, if you don't have evidence, I'm just gonna disregard your opinion.
Okay.
So, I would say I think it is an incredibly well-directed movie.
Yes.
Like I think Frank Oz directed The Dark Crystal. That was his directorial debut.
Yeah.
And this is his first kind of non-Henson movie, even though the Jim Henson people do the Audrey puppet. It's really not a Henson production.
Yeah.
And I think like the scene framing, the structure, the pacing, the performances, the musical numbers, it just feels like someone who's directing with a lot of like confidence.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they don't feel like someone who's making like going in one direction and then gets scared and goes in a different direction. Like everything feels very like this is what needs to happen next, and then this will be the next scene. The rhythm of the comedy is good, and it does. I think it does have kind of a Muppet-ish rhythm. Like Seymour Krelborn feels like he could have been a Muppet character.
He could have been easily played by Kermit.
Audrey seems like she could have been a Muppet character.
Yeah.
Like you could easily do Muppet Little Shop of Horrors, and it would work 100%, right? So yeah, I think overall everything is really strong for me. I do think that it didn't hit as strong as it did when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
But I don't blame the movie for that.
No.
That's more just me. And I'm like, I've gotten older. My tastes have matured. I'm a little more refined on what I expect.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
not like when you're like pumped with sugar and you're just like, oh, this is delicious. Now you're kind of like,
because like this is very much to me like a pop Broadway musical. Whenever I think of like really good Broadway musicals in this same vein, I would say like Sweeney Todd is better than this. And it has a lot of similar themes about revenge and bloodlust and things like this. It makes sense Little Shop is played a little lighter, though if you're watching it with the director's cut, I do think it is a darker movie with that cut. There's an actor in here we don't get a lot of for various reasons who was big in the 80s, Rick Moranis. I feel like if people were to ask me like name big Rick Moranis movies, I would go Strange Brew, where he is in there with Dave Thomas. They're playing those like Canadian brothers. I always forget their name from SCTV. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Little Shop, and then maybe like My Blue Heaven. The one where he's the FBI agent with Steve Martin, who's Nora Ephron movie. It's not that great. It's not that great.
It's probably like in passing.
But like those are the only four. I guess Ghostbusters, but he's just very supporting and small in that role.
The movie I remember him the most as a kid was like I think he was like a baseball or football coach and like.
Oh, Little Giants! I forgot that was near the kind of the end of his
I think
movie career.
Like he kind of retired to take care of his little wife.
Because I think then his wife died and they had kids, so he just kind of is devoted to them. But he appeared in a one of those cell phone commercials with Ryan Reynolds a few years ago.
I think it was supposed to be like Ryan Reynolds was talking about how much he loves him, and then like he just shows up in the commercial.
Well, and the joke was like, look how much we were willing to spend money to get Rick Moranis to show up in this commercial, even though he was probably just like, oh yeah, I get it that it's funny. No one sees me much anymore.
Yeah.
He did have a short term, it was a short period where he was trying to do like a country music album or something in like the late 90s, I feel like.
I mean, whatever.
Or like bluegrass or something.
I feel like I would allow him to do. There is like I wonder about like at least listening to the soundtrack with a stronger singer, because I'm not saying he's not good. He's got
this isn't his style of singing. Yeah.
Like he's got the facial expressions down, he's got the nervousness. He is so good to watch on screen. Like you think, yes, he is Seymour, he's pouring himself into it. But it's also the sad thing of knowing like this is a dude that's been typecast to play this type of character.
This nebbishy, meek kind of guy, yeah.
So I almost wanted a stronger singer in order to invoke the passion that he had when he was singing. I still think it's amazing that for the fact that there's like that he like sang the music, but then when he went to go like play the character, he played it in slow motion for like the puppet to be able to be moving fully the way they wanted to.
Yeah, I read that the Audrey 2, like the larger puppet in order to make it like that lip movement so fluid, they had to do it slowly, which meant then they would need to speed the film stock up.
Yeah, and you could tell by the tentacles because it almost looks like stop motion at times when you're paying attention.
And this time around, knowing that, I watched closer and I could see where there were a lot of cuts where it's, it cuts to his reaction in a different shot. And that was their way of getting around it for the most part. But there are scenes where the two of them need to be in the frame. And I did read that he performed those movements in slow motion,
which is amazing.
Yeah, and like there's little moments where it almost kind of looks like a silent film, his movement, but it's very subtle. You really have to pay attention. So like the editing in this movie, they did a great job in cutting around that.
Yeah.
So that, when I was a little kid, I never noticed any of that stuff. It felt like, oh, that is a plant that's alive and able to move around and talk and sing.
And there is something very like intimate and small about the movie, but it's kind of at the very beginning of the film, you have so many people out, like so many, like, because they're all talking about like working uptown while living downtown and like wanting to get out of Skid Row. So you have all these bodies going in and out, and you're just like in awe, thinking you're gonna get like a major kind of production up until like, oh, they're like Audrey goes into the plant store. No customers come in, and it's indicating like, okay, it's just them.
Well, that's a very like common trope, I think, in the modern Broadway musical, where you have this like lavish opening number where you do have all these people on stage.
Yeah.
And then looking at the structure of the movie and then thinking about it as a Broadway play, I'm like, oh, I can see the scenes in the play where you would have brought the full cast in.
Yeah.
Like when the store becomes super popular, you just bring out those same actors and they're crowding around the store.
Or like when they have that whole thing of Seymour becoming famous and he's talking to multiple people.
And at the end, when the like Audrey 2 goes crazy, you have that same stock cast kind of running around stage, freaking out as everything goes wrong.
I think that was a little bit missing for me towards the end.
You wanted it to feel more like a populated world.
Yes.
It does feel like a Broadway musical.
And that's like, it's not a bad thing about it. It also explains why it's so beloved, why every high school theater seems to play this at some point.
It seems like the songs, we'll talk about Ellen Green here in a minute, because I think some of her songs demand a lot from the singer, but the rest of the songs aren't necessarily, I'm not have any musical knowledge, but I got the sense from hearing them, they're not demanding a lot of the singer.
Yeah.
They're still going to be you have to learn them and it's a challenge. But yeah, that's why I think it's easy for high schools to do. And I think a lot of high schools, it's basically set in one location.
Yeah.
In the florist shop. And then the one thing that you want to put all your energy into is the Audrey puppet, because that's your big like showstopper.
Yeah.
In the play. So we talk about Rick Moranis. I find it interesting because like on SCTV, he played a far more diverse array of characters.
Yeah.
But then when he started doing movies, like you were saying, he just got typecast.
Yeah. Which
is a shame, because now we always have to wonder, like, what if he'd been given a villain role here or a romantic lead role? I think My Blue Heaven he gets a bit away from the typecasting because he is playing an FBI agent. So he's acting with a lot more like assuredness. But yeah, for the most part, this is who Rick Moranis was seen as in the eyes of the public. What about Ellen Green, who played Audrey, and I think is the only carryover from the Broadway musical. What did you think of her performance in the movie?
What a fucking set of pipes that woman has.
What are you, like an old vaudevillian? What a set of pipes that dame's got.
It's just so weird because like she has like that high pitched girlish voice,
which is an affectation. Like that's clearly not her real voice.
Yes, but it's also like she's a very interesting character in where, Seymour is in love with her, but even though she has feelings for Seymour, she's kind of like, I want to get out of Skid Row, so I'm dating someone who has money. And also, I don't deserve a nice guy like him.
Yeah, there's implications that she's like stripped or been like a sex worker in her past or something.
In order to like make additional money. I think it's just also like this sad thing is like we don't get to know her beyond that.
Yeah.
So she's just kind of a sexy yet sweet but dumb girl. And if you're going to put it in a modern sort of view, it's just sort of like it falls kind of flat. But she brings so much, like at the least in presence.
I would say she carries the movie.
Yes.
I think Rick Moranis is good, but I do think Ellen Green is carrying the movie because her personality is so magnetic. You can't help but like Audrey. Like I don't know how you could dislike her. Uh, and then, like you're saying, her singing ability is the strongest in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's just, I was so impressed with that way she can move. I guess it would be pitch.
Yeah.
Because she goes from high pitch to these real deep kind of notes.
Yeah.
And it's just seamless. There's not, you don't hear her like struggling for breath. You don't hear any like breaks. It's just she's moving up and down. Is it scales? Is that what you would call it? She's moving up and down the scales in like every other line. It's crazy. But I think, yeah, she doesn't get much character development. Like if somebody asked me name 3 things about Audrey, I would be like, well, she works at a florist, she's abused by her boyfriend, and she is Seymour's friend, I guess. But like 2 of those things are relationships to men. They're not about her. So yeah, she really isn't a very well-developed character. I think Green makes her a well-performed character.
Yeah, and I mean the same could be said about Seymour.
True.
Because it's supposed to be like, oh, he was an orphan. The owner of the store like took him in, gave him a place to sleep.
Mr. Mushnick.
Gave him a job. But then it's also the lament, which is indicated by the first song, is that he's treated like crap by this man, and he doesn't feel loved, and he's worried that he's never going to get out of the place where he's at. So they're surface level characters, which
once again, this is why it's probably a popular high school musical, is it's not very deep.
Yeah, and I think it's just supposed to be what it is. It's a pop musical with these characters, and it's supposed to be like, oh, well, the Aubrey 2, the alien plant is taking advantage of the fact that they want to get out of this of a place that they're so unhappy in.
And yeah, I think like the draw here is the music. It was Alan Menken, and I'm drawing a blank on the other guy, but I think they ended up doing a lot of like Disney stuff together. I think like Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and things like that.
I mean, I like, for example, like the 3 characters that are like helping narrate the songs. I don't think
they're like the doo-wop. They do have, there's Chiffon, Ronette, and Crystal.
Yeah.
But and their names are set on screen, but they kind of serve as like that Greek chorus trope where they're informing the audience of to like the mood and the tone of the scene.
Yeah. And like there's certain aspects of them that I really like, especially when it's supposed to be like, oh, the darker setting is supposed to come in, and like Audrey 2 is trying to convince Seymour, like, no, you need to feed me. You need to continue giving me different bodies. And it's supposed to be like the owner of the store is coming in, is like, I know what you did. And like the way that they're shot and portrayed, and even like slinking back into the shadows, is so cool to watch, because even like their expressions are like all knowing, all seeing, and it goes very well with the aesthetics and the vibes. But I think it's like, again, the ending just falls a little bit, it stretches out
the director's cut ending.
Yeah, stretches out too much, and I almost wish they had brought those 3 characters back, and like we didn't have to watch like 5 different Audreys like going through.
What's funny is the theatrical cut is 15 minutes shorter than the director's cut, and I think those 15 minutes are the attack of the Audrey 2s, which I want that ending, but yeah, shave it down, make it a little shorter. We have to talk about Steve Martin, who appears, he's not in very much of the movie, but I think I could tell that role in the credits, it said with special guest appearance by Steve Martin. And I don't know the technicalities of Broadway musicals other than just like, I've watched the Tony Awards a few times and I've listened to some original cast soundtracks. But it does seem like some musicals will have a kind of like guest star performer who you don't see through the whole play, but they're going to have like a big musical number that's like a showstopper kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they might play like a villain who's spoken about but doesn't appear much in the movie.
Yeah.
And that's what Oren Scrivello is, the dentist. Because I think a lot of people, if they remember one song from Little Shop of Horrors, it's I'd be a dentist song. I think that's the name of it, where it's his intro into the movie. We don't see him until this scene, and then he only appears one more time, or two more times, which is to meet Seymour and then to die. What did you think of Steve Martin in that role? It's not a deep role.
Yeah, I remember as a kid really loving that role. And I don't know what happened this time around. Like, I like it, but I almost wish that someone else was cast.
Steve Martin is very distracting.
Yes.
Because I don't believe him as this character.
No.
Like, he's supposed to be both funny and like scary.
Yeah.
And Steve Martin's not scary.
Like, he looks like he had a ton of fun doing
this.
Yeah. Like, he was probably asked it. He probably jumped immediately at the idea of doing it. But part of me just wanted someone else that also had a stronger voice.
In the modern recast, will we do Timothée Chalamet as Seymour and Armie Hammer as Oren? It's a Call Me by My Name reunion. But yeah, it's the I'd Be a Dentist song. It's still great.
Still a bop.
The scenes in the dentist are very well done. I think they're some of the funniest scenes in the movie. This time around, I liked the second visit to the dentist more for a couple reasons. You have it's Jim Henson's daughter plays a patient who's on her way out and has had all this dental work done, so she has this like crazy face mask. And then Bill Murray's playing the masochist who's waiting in the waiting room because he wants to be in pain. And their exchange, I think, is very funny. I think Martin and Murray in that scene are very funny off of each other. And then when Seymour shows up in his final confrontation with Oren, it is kind of a scary scene. Like, that's the first time that I really felt Martin when he puts on the nitrous mask and all that.
Yeah.
Like, it is like, oh, Jesus, this guy is like insane. But yeah, it's not as good as I remembered it. But when you're a kid, I think a lot of things seem better than they actually are because once again, your standards are just like, this is cool. And that's it.
I recognize that person. I kind of know who that person is.
Right, your sense of humor is a little more refined.
Really like this person, and it's like, yeah, there are parts that like you said in that scene, like for example, she's explaining to what was being done to her. We cannot understand her, but like Bill Murray is able to like understand it completely. And then when Bill Murray is finally in the back, he's like telling Steve Martin's character, you are a genius, you are amazing, and he's showing pleasure through the pain, which angers Steve Martin's character.
I was also thinking, have we ever seen Bill Murray play a character like this? And I mean, you could say like Bob from What About Bob is similar-ish, but normally Bill Murray plays like the cool above it all guy.
Yeah.
And that's not this character. And I think he was actually pretty good as this. And it made me go like, why weren't we casting Bill Murray in more diverse roles and seeing what he could do?
To be cool.
Yeah, I do think he's a very insecure person ultimately. Another cameo, which I think is my favorite cameo in the movie, and I didn't remember it from when I was a kid, but I love it now. Christopher Guest as the first customer is so funny in like a dumb way. Because that's the scene where Seymour puts the plant out for the first time in the window, and then immediately Christopher Guest pops in, and like the way he's delivering his dialogue, like this emotionless mannequin, and just like endless positivity, and like the way all of his dialogue is so on the nose, as if he overheard their conversation right before. I find that pretty funny. I enjoyed that.
I think it's almost like he understood what movie he was in and what character he needed to play.
Yeah.
And that he was not supposed to outshine anybody. I feel like for Steve Martin, it is hard for him not to. I like.
But I think that role is one of those like scene stealing roles.
I know, but I think part of me just wish it was like a stronger singer in order for that to be stolen versus me going, oh, it's Steve Martin with black hair.
I was trying to think, who would you cast as Steve Martin, that character in a modern version? For some reason, I'm thinking like a black singer. I feel like that would be really good.
Yeah.
But I can't really think of who I would do. Wayne Brady as Oren.
Oh,
that could be fun.
Yeah, I feel like he would really have fun with
and
it.
he is very funny, and he can do improv, so that there might be little things he comes up with during the recording, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
For Seymour in a modern movie, who is like is there anyone like Rick Moranis now? I feel like that character type.
I feel like that character type has died and he's been like embedded more into like femme-like characters to just be awkward and
So
weird.
maybe cast a like non-binary femme actress in that role.
Yeah.
Elliot Page is Seymour. I don't know if he can sing though.
No, I don't know if he can sing. I feel like I wouldn't want to do a recasting because again, it's just sort of like
it really does seem like Seymour Krelboyne. Like
that's just he was.
But at some point they're going to make another Little Shop at some point.
Do that because they got no other IPs and they don't want to pay any fucking writers.
Well, when I say that, other than Ellen Greene, the other person who steals the show is Levi Stubbs as Audrey too.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about the singing. It's Ellen Greene and Levi Stubbs are the strongest singers in this movie.
Yeah, and that's why I think I have a little bit of a problem towards the end when it drags out because Audrey feels like Audrey too could have had more moments to sing.
Yeah.
And it like how amazing would have been it would have been like a weird duet between Audrey and Audrey too, like singing at the same like those really powerful voices would have been like great in my mind, but it's
well, I'm also wondering, it'll have to be something I look up off air because often like these musicals are a lot longer. So like the theatrical version of this is an hour 28. The director's cut's an hour 43. A lot of times these musicals are like over 2 hours, 3 hours long.
Yeah.
So it does, and it's very common for songs to get cut.
Mm-hmm.
So I am very interested to know the full Broadway staging of this. What are the scenes that aren't included? What are the songs that aren't included? And maybe we do get more of Audrey because I feel if you're gonna build a plant like that, this kind of puppet to put on stage every night, you're really gonna want to show it off more.
Yeah.
But yeah. So looking back at this reviewing of Little Shop of Horrors, it's been a long time. It's been decades for me since I've seen it. Would you recommend someone who hasn't seen it watch it?
Yeah, because I feel like it's a pop culture thing. It would also be really funny to show them the cartoon and then show
the Fox Kids Little Shop cartoon. Very hip hop.
I was very confused when I saw that as a kid. I was like, what is going on?
It was like Little Shop babies.
Yeah.
Because they were all, it was Seymour, Audrey, and then I think Oren was like a bully or something at school, something like that. But yeah, and then it also kind of undercut the plant eating people part of it, which I guess you couldn't get away with on a Saturday morning cartoon show.
Like for example, Beetlejuice had a fucking cartoon and he was friends with
Lydia. Yeah, they shaved the edges off. That's something we don't see anymore. Like where is the Oppenheimer animated series? But yeah, it would be funny. That could be a funny thing sometime to come up with children's animated versions of popular movies. Like the Everything Everywhere All at Once animated series. It could work. It could work. That one, I think that one has potential. To the students of Harrington High, the principal and her posse of teachers have always been a little odd, but lately they've been behaving positively alien. Controlled by otherworldly parasites, the faculty try to infect students one by one. Cheerleader Delilah, Jordana Brewster, football player Stan, played by Sean Hatosy, drug dealer Zeke, Josh Hartnett, and new girl Mary Beth, Laura Harris, team up with some of their other classmates, they're leaving out Elijah Wood and Clea Duvall, to fight back against the invaders.
Damn.
This was, that was weird.
They left the outcasts out.
So this was written by David Wechter and Bruce Kimmel. It got a major rewrite by Kevin Williamson, who we're going to be talking a lot about here, and then was directed by Robert Rodriguez after Kevin Williamson turned down the job of directing it. So this is yet again another movie that we both saw when we were younger. I think I first saw it like early on in college, so like early 2000s. Had you ever seen it from start to finish?
Yeah, like a long time ago.
And I think this was my first time watching it from beginning to end. It was always one of those movies I would like. I'd be flipping through the channels and then come across it, a third of the way in or halfway through and then watch it. So I always knew how it ended. I knew all the twists, but I just never knew how it started. What did you think upon revisiting The Faculty?
I remember when I was younger, I did not like the movie. I didn't like it. I just felt something was off. And then before we watched it, you were kind of like, oh, I remember like kind of liking this.
I remember being like, oh, this is like a really fun concept. And it almost felt like an 80s movie premise, but it was made in the late 90s.
Yeah, to me watching this, it felt very CW like show kind of, and this is not having to do with like the outdated effects. It was just like the stereotypes that we're dealing with each and every fucking character.
It is not aged well.
No, it's all over the place.
I would say, I think you're right. It feels like a show that would work really good as a CW series where you would just slow burn the reveal of who was an alien and who wasn't. But yeah, there's some things about it that don't work anymore. I'll talk a little bit about Kevin Williamson because that's essentially why the movie got made.
Okay.
So this came out in 1998. Scream had come out maybe I think 3 years prior, I want to say, like 95. So between Scream and this, he wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer. He wrote Scream 2. He wrote Halloween H2O. And the same year that came out the same year as this. Okay. And Dawson's Creek, which he created, debuted the same year as this. So like 1998 was the year of Kevin Williamson.
Just accumulating money and giving work to Josh Hartnett.
And so his directorial debut, Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which I don't know much about other than it's like high school students getting revenge on a teacher, but it's like a dark comedy, was a box office failure for Miramax, who was like his big cheerleader. And that signaled kind of the downturn of his career. So his career, the peak of it, burnt really hot for maybe 5 years. He's still around and he's still done stuff since then. He just doesn't have the prestige he did for that like small cluster of years.
Yeah.
Especially like right around this time, he was very big. What they had him do was he was brought in with this script that had already been written, and his job was to make it sound more hip and punch up the dialogue and make the characters more interesting.
Yeah.
So when we talk about his contributions, like I think they're the most obvious things about the movie.
Yeah.
But I also do want to talk about Robert Rodriguez because he brings some things to the table here. Of course, Salma Hayek he had collaborated with on Desperado just a few years prior. I want to say like Robert Patrick has done something else with him. Like maybe he was in Once Upon a Time in Mexico or something. I feel like there's a connection. But so it's a movie made by two people who are seen as very like seminal late 90s pop movie guys, right? Having said all of that, how did you feel about the way the film set up its concept?
So the setup wasn't bad. I like the fact that it's just sort of like, so the infection had happened prior, but the students that now we're putting the focus on do not know what is happening, right?
Well, like the aliens have focused on the adult authority figures first,
yes,
which makes sense.
I liked that. I also I really like the fact that, for example, Elijah Wood's character, Casey, at the least we see like the outcome of it, just like how his parents react once he tries to tell authorities as to what's happening. There's like a good setup as to what's occurring. It's like, oh, this is infecting the school with the adults. At some point we get kind of like a gruesome part, like when they're like in the locker rooms, the like former jock is there taking a shower, and like who I assume used to be like the lunch lady approaching him, and they excuse it by saying that she has had cancer, and that's why she's.
But her skin looks like it's dehydrated.
Yes,
it's like drying out. Yeah.
And these are like, there's little quirky stuff that kind of reminds me of like,
tonally, it did feel like Rodriguez was trying to do his impression of Wes Craven. When you think about the way Scream and Scream 2, the way those plot beats hit.
And it also felt like it was trying to pick up hints from like alien movies from the 1960s and 50s.
Well, like I was thinking,
like the standing still while the water's pouring on them,
I think it's like
odd behavior.
Invaders from Mars, where it's
yeah.
about the little boy who knows there's an invasion, nobody believes him, and meanwhile the aliens are taking over the adults.
And so there's stuff like that that works. There's stuff that has not aged very well. Like,
well, we'll go through each of our main players here and we'll do. First, I want to talk about the supporting cast, which I would say are the adults. They are certainly not the stars. No. We've got Salma Hayek, Famke Janssen, Jon Stewart, Robert Patrick, Piper Laurie, Bebe Neuwirth, Daniel von Bargen, who was in Seinfeld and Malcolm in the Middle. You've got Christopher McDonald, Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore. Those are kind of the faces you're going to recognize in the movie. Yeah. What did you think of, because they're basically all the antagonists of the movie to a degree. Yeah. And so what did you think of their performances? Were they genuinely frightening? Did you feel that do you feel like the movie balanced the comedy and the horror well, or do you feel like it veered into one direction more than the other?
It was really campy at the end. Like when it comes to it, there was only a few shots that you're kind of like, ooh, that could be cool. But it was just, that's what it was. It was just a shot. It was like the positioning of the characters. I never really felt scared because there wasn't really like a moment where you'd be like, because the fear was supposed to be what happens when you are taken over by them. And it's this mix of like, because they were possessed, they kind of like still had all their memories.
Yeah, that was the thing I didn't understand. Are they still the same person, or are they the alien?
Yeah,
or like, where's the line?
There wasn't like, for example, an explanation of it being like a hive mind of sorts, that they're all like in communication with each other.
They kind of hint at that near the end of the movie when the queen is revealed. But,
yeah, which was dumb. Yeah, but it's,
and I mean, watching this movie now, I immediately knew who the queen was.
Yeah.
It's so obvious. Like if you've ever watched a horror movie, like all the clues are there.
Yeah. And I think it's just, you want it to be threatening, and you also want the students to be kind of afraid. So moments that they could have had, like, for example, Jon Stewart is playing a science professor, and they discover one of the parasites. They're like studying it. It duplicates itself, that was the type of part that was confusing, because
the rules in this movie are all over the place.
Because if it's duplicating itself, is it taking it over, or is it just basically taking over the shape of your body, which they were not clear on.
And also, like, why did it need human hosts? That was one of the things I kept trying to figure out. It seems like it seems like it just needed water.
Yeah, they were saying because the human is like 90% water, or like 90 or 70% water, like it was like the ideal host to have.
On a planet that is mostly made of water, was it they couldn't do salt water?
Well, they're
because I'm like, did they ever have a conversation about salt water versus fresh water?
No, and it was just, I think it was also just sort of like, oh, if you're gonna like take over the world, you're just gonna go to a place that nobody really is gonna pay attention.
Well, because this was supposed to be set in Ohio.
Yeah,
and when it's clearly Texas, like everything about the visuals, I'm like, this is Texas.
Well, I think
this is like Midlands, Texas.
It feels very Texas because of like the pro football. And listen, I'm not saying Ohio isn't pro football, but it's just like
it looks like Texas.
Yeah. And like, so I wish that there would have been an element of it just being like, okay, yeah, they took over a school and they're taking over a body that has a lot of water, but if they put it in Texas, it would have been like they're also dealing with the heat. And like make it a little bit more interesting, because like one of the moments that could have been scary, like we have Stan, who is like the jock that has decided that he's no longer wanting to be the star quarterback, because he's realizing that like if he hits his prime now, when he goes to college, he's fucked, kind of thing, right? Instead of maybe being like, hey, can I collaborate on something to like get grades and still go to, like, there's never a moment of just being like, Like the characters are established.
They're so flat.
But they're also flat. There's just like I feel
let's
like
let's go through each of the characters.
Okay.
We'll start with Zeke.
But let me finish the whole thought.
Yeah.
And the moment is he's talking to the coach, being like, "I quit the team," and the coach, which has been possessed by this alien, is like, "All right, cool," and he's like, "You're not gonna ream me out." He's like, he gives us all this dude's credentials, like this like this jock's credentials, and is like, "But you know what can I do? You're quitting," and just like Stan thinks that's cool. That's so nice. And like, so there's never a moment where like when they're discussing what's going on, he's kind of like, no, like he does tell him, oh, he was nice about it. But nobody ever goes like, when the fuck has he ever been nice? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like there's never a question of the like, yeah, a lot of times they're like, yes, you're crazy for believing that. But there's never a moment being like, okay, but let's really evaluate how they're behaving.
Well, this story feels very start and stop.
Yeah.
I never felt like the momentum of the story kicked in and then it was like, okay, here we go. And then it was just boom, 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 like set piece after set piece, which is what a movie like this should do to work. Like what it's trying to, but it felt like, oh, big set piece and then a long lull and it's just people talking. And then another big set piece and then people talking it was that start and stop and it just kind of made me start to lose my interest because I could see where it was going and I knew who the alien queen was and it just felt like we'll get to there and then do something interesting with that.
Really long, like watching people play a long game of Mafia or the Werewolf, like trying to figure out who.
So when we're talking about like who the star of the movie is, would you agree that Josh Hartnett was the person in the cast that they were trying to position as the star of this movie?
Kind of, but I would say that it was
because this is early in his career. This is probably one of the first movies where he's getting attention. It
felt more like Elijah Wood was the main character, but then it's also so weird to hear you read that blurb. You didn't write it. It was just like it's a blurb that just fails to mention Elijah Wood.
Josh Hartnett's clearly the heartthrob in the movie.
Yeah, I know.
While Elijah Wood he's there for the weird girls, right? That's what he's there for.
I don't know if I should be offended somehow. Not that I was like into it, but it's just like.
But I mean, Elijah Wood, he's a little soft boy. Okay, he's a little soft boy, and if you're into that, he's there for you.
He's non-threatening.
But the ladies want to hump on Josh Hartnett. That's what's going on.
Yeah.
His hair in this movie,
was
a choice, wasn't it?
It looks like a 5-year-old cut his hair. You know, some girls like little, well, mostly happens to little girls, but like
they want a short haircut.
No, children cut their own bangs.
Yeah,
that's what it looks like.
I told you during the movie, I said he looks like Lloyd Christmas from Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah,
like when they were gonna do, you know.
But Lloyd Christmas had a better haircut.
Yeah. So he is kind of they established that he's 18, 19. He's like been held back a year. Yeah. And then that way they can justify the sexual tension between him and the English teacher played by Famke Janssen, which still doesn't make it.
No.
Yeah. It's still like, he's still a student. She's still a teacher in a high school.
Yeah.
So this is really creepy. But then think about Dawson's Creek was Joshua Jackson's character was having an affair with one of the teachers in that show, like in the first season. I didn't watch it. That's just one of the things I remember from the show.
Yeah, this was a time where, you know, it was cute to call girls jailbait, and then, you know, if a guy was with a teacher, it wasn't rape. He's just, you know, he's fucking.
Yeah, it was framed as like, oh, it's not a bad thing. So Zeke's parents are out of the country.
They're in Europe. Like instead of, it felt as if they were like too afraid to have him be like from a bad family.
Yeah.
They're just like, no, his parents just go to Europe and leave him alone. Mind you, I did have a friend like that growing up. Not that he was super rich. His dad would just be like, all right, I'm gonna go like hang out with my girlfriend. Okay. See you next week.
And then Zeke is also supposed to be really good at science, which explains, I guess, well, like in the drugs he's selling, he's taking like Bic pens and taking out the little ink thing and then filling them with this white powder that he's then selling to students.
Yeah.
Which, funny enough, one of them is played by, I think his name is Wiley something. He was in Dazed and Confused. He's kind of a Richard Linklater collaborator. Yeah. And the other one is played by notorious convicted rapist Danny Masterson.
Yeah, my favorite is the name of
in the credit. Yeah,
it is Fuck Up One.
And I felt, yeah, that's kind of who Danny Masterson is. So it's later revealed that these are caffeine pills that he's grinding up and
mixing up with other stuff.
And he has this kind of lab set up in his house, we eventually see.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to be a case of, oh, you think he's one thing, like a burnout, but he's actually, this really smart chemist guy. So sort of proto Walter White kind of a thing, or Jesse. What did you think of that character of Zeke?
It was fine. It just felt like they just decided that instead of Casey, played by Elijah Wood, being the nerdy kid, they just swapped it out to make Josh Hartnett's character more interesting.
There did seem to be redundancy with those two characters and the role they were playing in the story.
Yeah, it felt as if like they, like at the beginning, maybe they just wrote him as like Zeke is supposed to be like this burnout who is smart in other ways, but they're like, well, let's just make him science smart, which really doesn't. It's weird because then it's like, if he failed, why?
Because what would have made sense is, where is his bond with Jon Stewart's character then, who's the science teacher?
Yeah, there could have been a bond.
That would have been interesting.
There is a moment that like Famke Johnson, or if that's her name, she plays the teacher that like Zeke,
English teacher,
like approaches him as like, hey, I need you to stop like selling drugs. And she's like, I don't understand why you didn't take your summer courses. You could have passed, but why are you here? And like maybe establish the fact that like in a fucked up way, because Zeke's parents are away all the time, he wants to stay in high school because that's where he feels secure. And we do that by having him have a relationship with the science teacher that could sometimes be on his case, but that is also sort of like, no, we're going to get you into a good like junior college, and that way you can go to like anything to establish to make the adults seem like it would break the teenagers' hearts to see them being possessed. But instead, we're just getting the teachers have no charm.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, many of them we're meeting as soon as they've been possessed. And if they haven't been possessed, the choices they've made to play their characters feel very one-dimensional. Like Famke Janssen, for example, is just supposed to be this mousy, meek, like cartoon character.
Yeah, and it's also like super weird because not only like, hey, you were a teacher, but I've also known like other teachers who
it's not a teacher personality.
That, like, it's not even if they are like, we're soft and meek in personality, they had to develop a persona when they're teaching.
Yes.
Because they had to be heard. But in this one, she's like, can anyone answer?
She seems like a terrible teacher. Like, she's not motivating any of her students.
And it's a weird thing. It's all over the place.
Elijah Wood is Casey.
Yeah.
What did we think of him in this movie?
He starts off interesting, ends up just being like boring.
And he's the character I think who had the most potential.
Yes.
At the start of the movie, probably because it's Elijah Wood, and when you look at these other actors, he's one of the stronger ones.
Yes.
And yeah, they relegate him to the sort of awkward nerd thing, but then also like trying to pair him with Jordana Brewster's character Delilah, and I'm not sure, like, I know they both work for the paper, so that's why they're together so often, but that relationship, I was like, I don't believe it.
Forced, because she kind of like disappears in the middle because of the whole thing.
Yeah, she ends up possessed at one point,
and mind you, she is a very interesting character when you start to think about like the way she's talking and behaving.
Well, like her relationship to Stan, the quarterback, like she's a complex character. It's just a shame that this movie doesn't develop any of that complexity.
Yeah, and it's like,
and maybe she would have been a good main character,
because like one of the things that like, for example, like I said earlier, I like the fact that when Casey, played by Elijah Wood, ends up trying to tell the authorities what's going on, and then he realizes, oh shit, they're gonna possess my parents, and they've already possessed the police, meaning like we can't go to the police. And then his parents, because they don't believe him, are like, we are gonna have you see a professional tomorrow, but you still have to fucking go to school. Even when he tries to like escape from his house, and then he swears that he sees like the teachers wandering around in his house trying to get, and like in front of his house trying to get him. Like that was a cool kind of shot, but we don't get any of that repetition of being outside of school and feeling their eyes on you, like not feeling as if they could ever get some rest or like be able to be free from this because it's coming all over, right?
It's coming all over.
But like, Elijah Wood's character is just like, there's so much potential, and then it's like, all right, we're stuck in the school. Mind you, they use the school to the full potential.
Oh yeah, most of this movie takes place at that school.
Okay, so should we go to Delilah or Stokely next?
I want to talk about Sean Hatosi, who played Stan. They clearly are trying to push him to be a major character in the movie. I found him very boring.
Yeah, he's like he delivers nothing.
There's no charisma.
No.
It's like he looks the part, I guess, but I don't care.
He looks a little older than the rest of them, like in the film.
Yeah.
Because he just has one of those faces. And then you really don't believe him as a person who wants to better himself, because he's just like
nothing he says feels like he genuinely wants, like he has a drive to do it.
Yeah. And it's like, it would have been interesting if he was going to quit the team, that suddenly he approaches Casey and is like, you're smart, help me study. Like,
yeah, and then that creates an interesting triangle with Delilah then.
Yeah, because he's just a thud of a character. It's just like and like we don't even see him like use his football abilities at all during this. Like you think like there would be a moment like that he's outrunning the monster at some point, or like some stupid shit of it just
throws
like,
something, yeah.
Like throws a football, like,
or like they need to get a thing of the drug, so he like puts it in a football. No, and
he is there just to be like Stokely's like fantasy, which is a fucked up like.
Well, what's time to finally talk about Stokely, which I think Mary Beth Louise, the person who's the new student from Atlanta, is completely boring. There's nothing interesting about her.
I'm Mary Beth Louise. I'm from Atlanta. Like
that's her thing, is I'm the new kid at the school. But yes, Clea Duvall as Stokely. Probably one of the worst aged things about this movie.
Oof.
She dresses goth-ish, I guess movie goth. Loves to read science fiction, so she's a great exposition delivery device about all things sci-fi. But then the worst part is Delilah torments her by saying she's a lesbian, she's a lesbo, and Stokely's constantly saying, "No, I'm not. No, I'm not." And then wouldn't you realize it, she has a crush on Stan, Delilah's boyfriend. And by the end of the movie, Delilah's with Casey, and then Stokely is allowed to be with Stan. And Stokely has changed all of her clothing. She looks like the most basic 90s bitch in the world.
Purple. Like purple, which is a substitute for black, right?
Yeah. That's like the nice girl dark color.
Yeah,
right?
It's this weird thing is like Stokely, I think, is supposed to have a friendly relationship with Casey, but they're like at odds, right? So there's never a moment of being like, because for example, there's a moment like Casey's asking Stokely stuff and they're talking very much like familiar, right?
They seem like they would be a couple.
Or they at the least good friends, right? Yeah. And like, so he's like, Stokely, what books have you read that's similar to this? And she's like detailing everything to him, and he's like, that's probably going to be it. He's like, and people are like, you're insane. And he's like, well, these authors must have got it from somewhere. Maybe this occurred and then they were able to stop it, and this is the only way they can share the information. And so Stokely starts to slowly feel like a little bit more important because she seems to notice certain details, right? However, all we're left with her is her having used being a lesbian as a way to keep people away, because she tells Mary Beth at some point when she's like, oh, are you a lesbian? How long have you been out? And she's like, I'm not a lesbian. I allow it as a shield for people not to get close to me.
And it's what I think what makes it even worse is that Clea Duvall is openly gay.
Yeah.
The very next year she would be in But I'm a Cheerleader.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like she was open like to her friends, but not open out to the public during this time.
And then to cast her in this like character that is constantly denying that they're gay, which implies that to be gay would be bad because there are no gay characters in this movie.
No.
Here's my twist on how I would do this if I remade this now. you have the love triangle of Stokely, Delilah, Stan, right?
Mhm.
But Stokely and Delilah end up together.
Yeah.
Stan and Casey don't end up with anybody. And then Zeke reveals he's gay in the third act. Because what happens is Mary Beth reveals she's the queen alien, right? And she's like, oh, I seduced you, da-da-da-da. And I just feel like there could be a great line for Zeke of something along the lines of like, you thought I was into you? I was just being nice because you're the new student. I'm gay. And then jams one of like the caffeine things into her. Because I think that would be a fun twist to have your sort of the character we're hinting at is the action hero star of this movie, who we've all made these assumptions about.
Yeah.
Is well, he's gay, actually. He's not this like ladies' man heartthrob for the girls kind of a thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, it felt like it had a lot of tired tropes.
Yeah.
And it made me think of when we went back and watched a bunch of SNL episodes.
Oh,
And how when you get to the ones in the 90s and you're like, these are more homophobic than the shit from the 70s and the 80s.
Well, especially like the early 2000s was very transphobic. And like,
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know if they thought they were being progressive by simply acknowledging that queer people existed, I guess, but then mocking them.
yeah, and I think like what's really interesting is like Delilah, who when it comes to the female characters is a little bit more interesting because when Stan tells her, I'm quitting to focus on my education, she tells him, how are you going to get into college? That's your only way for scholarships.
Yeah.
Like she is a little bit more advanced than everyone else. Casey goes around looking for her thinking that she had bowed out, and she explains like, and he was like, I told my parents, they didn't believe me. And she was like, oh, I told my mom, but she's an alcoholic, so I have no one else to go to. And she's wearing glasses, and it's supposed to, and it like, and so I don't know when she was infected. Was it supposed to be she was infected before that or like during it? They make it,
I think like there's something to do with the contact lenses dry your eyes out or something. Is that what it
yeah,
is? So she couldn't
which
wear
is
them.
like
It's the film doesn't make it explicit
way.
enough, and this is a dumb movie, so they need to make things explicit.
Yeah, and it's also like this weird thing that like for some reason the adults act a little bit weird, and then
But
like
the teenagers can play it cool.
play it like to the T until like they're told to do certain things.
So I would say the central villain in the movie is Coach Willis, played by Robert Patrick. Like if you think of all the adults
yeah,
who constantly pop up as an antagonist towards our characters, it's him.
but it's just because he's got that face.
Yeah, and it's a shame because I think Robert Patrick is a good actor.
He's just got a villain face.
Well, because he was in Peacemaker, he played his dad and was a villain.
Mhm.
But he just has one of those like hard faces.
Just one of those faces that you go, I don't trust you.
And so what I'd love is for a film to cast him in like a comedic role.
A lovable grandpa.
Oh yeah, level like something like that, because I think there's potential for that actor.
Yeah.
Did you feel that anyone stood out in this cast?
No.
Yeah, that's a shame. Because when I think about Little Shop of Horrors, to me, I'm like, well, Ellen Green and Levi Stubbs were like, they carried the movie. This movie, like, no one really gets a moment to shine. I think Elijah Wood comes the closest.
Yeah.
But even then, I just kept thinking, oh, I've seen him in such better things.
Yeah, and it's just sort of like all you can think is, oh, it's Elijah Woods. Like, and he's not playing dorky enough that it's funny but cringy at the same time. He's just there. And then it doesn't help that then when you look at the cast of characters for the adults and you know they've done like really like outstanding performances
Like,
or really
Piper
funny.
Laurie is great. Or was great. She passed away last week.
She passed away. But she's barely given anything.
But I say of all the adults, she's the one that comes the closest to giving like a good performance.
Yeah, because she knows how to stare in the fucking camera when she's supposed to be.
Well, she knows nuance.
Yeah.
So she doesn't play it as I'm a villain. She plays it as I'm very calm and in control.
And I think the other weird thing is supposed to be like the shift in like the adults is that the women are like wearing a little bit more sexier clothing in comparison to what they were wearing before. But it's really hard to...
Salma Hayek doesn't, though. She just wears her nurse scrubs.
Because she gets, it was that day she gets taken over.
Yeah.
But then we see her with her hair down while she's, doing an ear inspection on every student, meaning that there's...
So what you're saying is you wish that like Jon Stewart had shown up in like assless chaps or something.
He needs to come in with really tight little shorts.
Well, I mean, you had Coach Willis is wearing little gym shorts in the movie, so there you go. Something for the ladies.
Then towards the end, it's supposed to be they're all disinfected because they killed the queen, and
which I feel is a very cop-out kind of ending because it negates like I thought there were characters that were dead, and it's like, oh, they're not, they're still alive. Okay,
it's like Josh Hartnett's aka Zeke has joined the football team,
which didn't make any sense.
But it's not as if like he got coached by Stan of how to run.
And did he ever express an interest in it?
No.
And also like the fact that you're repeating, dude, joining the football team on your like second senior year, not a move people make. I don't think
coaches would allow you unless your grades were good.
No.
And unless the coach was like, I'm so grateful that you got me out of.
And is it implied that he's in a relationship with the English teacher?
Yeah, because she's sitting on the fucking.
Okay, he's 19, but he's still a student. Like, there's got to be an ethics clause about that.
It was the 90s, bro. People be fucking.
But yeah, I would say I went into this with moderate expectations, having remembered what I saw back in college. But wow, what a disappointing movie. And it's not a bad premise. It's not a bad cast either.
No.
Like it clearly is the script. And I'm getting to the point where I don't think Robert Rodriguez is a very good director. Like I think From Dusk Till Dawn, and then once again, that's what I would need to revisit, right? But I thought Desperado was fine. It wasn't great.
No, Desperado is fine. I like Mirachi better, but I feel like because the acting is better, it just feels as if like he's the type of guy that you hire to get it done. Like,
yeah, Robert Rodriguez, he feels like he was kind of in the wake of Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah,
and I mean you see that because I think they've like Quentin Tarantino's probably produced some of the stuff they did. What was the Grindhouse movie together? So they do have very similar sensibilities. They're probably around the same age. And yeah, it just feels like every Robert Rodriguez movie I see, there's a lot of good elements on the table, but they never get assembled in a way that makes me walk away going, I loved that movie.
It just feels like the B tier version of what it should have been.
And when it feels like it's plot beats that I'm like, yeah, I could see that coming. That doesn't surprise me. It's everything you would expect to happen scene to scene.
Yeah, there's no sense of tension.
But yeah, so this Halloween episode kind of ending a little disappointingly. So I'm guessing you would not recommend The Faculty.
No.
I would say unless you're some sort of like Kevin Williamson completist.
No, unless by some chance you want to see Jordana Brewster really be a fucking bully.
She is pretty mean.
She's really good at being mean.
But yeah. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out our show notes to relevant links to places we'd like to share with you, including our blog, popcult.blog. Make sure to subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit our blog right now, you'll find that we are finishing up our October series of horror movies. Just reviewed The Silence of the Lambs today, and then coming up later in this week, we've got reviews for Todd Browning's Freaks, and then the Spanish found footage film Wreck. Coming up in November, we'll be kicking off that month with a series on French director Agnès Varda, director I've heard a lot about, but I've never seen a single one of her movies. She was part of kind of the French New Wave in the 60s, but continued making films all the way up until just a few years ago when she passed. And I'm interested in kind of exploring her work, and I hope you'll join us for that. Our next episode of this podcast will be our Halloween Spooktacular, so make sure that you listen in for that. We'll have some surprises in there for you. If you enjoy what we do here and on the blog, we would really encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have lots of different tiers to pick from. Speaking of which, I want to thank our patrons Morphine, who donates at the sneak preview level, and Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. If you donate at that writer's room level or higher, you'll get to pick one movie every month for us to watch and review, and you can even include your own thoughts with that if you want to. Also, no matter what tier that you join our Patreon at, you will get access to exclusive patron-only podcasts. I think we've done about 2 series so far that are completed, and we've just started a new one called Screenplay, where Ariana and I are creating a world, and then we're going to do a co-op GM-less tabletop roleplay experience in that world. The first episode, which is us doing the world building, dropped yesterday, so if you join now, you'll be able to listen to that. There'll be 5 more episodes coming in that season, so we hope you'll join us for that. Well, until next time, you keep listening, and we'll keep watching.